Hello, and welcome to our session on the future factory. Um, Obviously, the Industry 4.0 and automation and new ways of manufacturing have been a discussion for years. But obviously, many things have changed during the pandemic, and some would argue that this has accelerated the need and indeed the implementation of Industry 4.0. So hopefully, we've got a fantastic panel today from a range of experiences to talk about how they see the future for factories and manufacturing. So I'd like to introduce our panel today. We've got Eric Cowan, Vice President of Solution Delivery and Automation at Stanley Black & Decker, Sasha Petrovich, Solution Strategist of cloud computing and tech company Citrix, Svetan Rachev, Cripps Professor in Production Engineering and Director for the Institute of Advanced Manufacturing in Nottingham, and Bridget Sparrow, the Site Director for Dow, the chemicals company at Terneuzen, the second biggest site of the global chemicals company. So thank you very much for coming. I just want to remind the audience that we're going to leave time for a Q&A at the end, and there's a Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen. Please do submit questions. Don't wait till the end. Submit them throughout the session, and we can either sprinkle them through the session or save them towards the end. And if you want to share your thoughts and tweets on social media, please use hashtag #FTManufacturing. So now let's kick off to take advantage of the knowledge that we have gathered here today. And for me, I think one of the most important things is to try and define what exactly do we mean by the phrase future factory? Is it a place, a process, a concept? And for that, Svetan, I'd be very interested to hear how do you define what a future factory is?
I'll start with the pandemic, which highlighted the capacity and capability challenges of how we can deliver critical products and maintain production in the face of major disruptions. And we can see some ripples of that today in the supply chain. So it also highlighted the need for a resilient manufacturing environment, manufacturing systems that can adapt, repurpose, relocate, and better use available production capabilities. It also accelerated the emerging trend towards more localized, greener type of manufacturing. So how would the future factories address these challenges? Future smart factories will be able to rapidly reconfigure to adapt to different product requirements or deliver different parts of the production process within the same facility. And that is precipitated by that need to repurpose, redefine the production, and respond in a much more dynamic way to the changing market environment. Such manufacturing factories and systems will also have some distinctive features which are defined by where the technology is today, particularly on the IT side, in terms of ability to recognize and contextualize product and process requirements, and then adapt its structure and control environment to respond to changing requirements. Product and process data will be utilized for continuous process optimization, full traceability, and also quality assurance. And artificial intelligence and machine learning techniques will increasingly support the drive towards more autonomous production in terms of different parts of the manufacturing process, and in some cases, larger element of the production environment. It is very important, though, to highlight that the future factories will be built around people. And in a way, the technology will be used to enhance human skills and knowledge and their roles within the manufacturing environment. Another key feature is context awareness in terms of how machines and people will become much more aware of each other, and that will allow more distributed joint decision making within the manufacturing systems. And as I mentioned, as a result of that, we also have massive change in the supply chain with a drive towards more localized, better embedded into the local supply chains and communities, factories, which will have significant social, economic, and environmental benefits.
Thank you, Svetlana. I mean, to be honest, listening to that, it sounds amazing, but it almost sounds like the factory has to do absolutely everything. And I just wonder how in the real world, companies are implementing this concept of a future factory and what it requires. I mean, Eric, for Stanley Black and Decker, how are you interpreting on the ground the concept of the future factory?
Well, Svetlana made some excellent points, right, about the regionalization kind of manufacturing, both of the supply chain. One of the things we've definitely learned throughout the pandemic, but it goes with our company vision about make where we sell. So in the future factory, as he said, people are going to be at the core. What we're doing is creating systems that allow those people to be more autonomous in their decision making by empowering them with data. And at the same time, we're working on changing our processes to adapt to this new reality so that we are able to really drive toward this concept of, say, cost neutrality, so that I can build something in the region I'm going to sell it, say in the Americas, for example, at the same cost relative to building it in another portion of the world. We do that through various different investments, because at the end of the day, if we want to achieve that more regional structure to make where we sell, we have to change the way we're doing the business.
Brilliant. Thank you, Eric. People at the heart of it, empowering people to use the data. Bridget, how is Dow actually looking at this? You're a site director at one of the largest sites in the Dow sort of landscape. How are you seeing what it's changing what you're doing? Do you have future factories as entities, or is it just bits and pieces that get applied to existing factories?
I suppose the opportunities for us are very heavily influenced by the nature of the work that we do and the assets that we have. So maybe in contrast to a company like Black & Decker, we're in the business of producing large volumes of chemicals that requires a large investment in static assets. So the flexibility that the new digital capabilities are bringing to us are more to do with the optimization of our processes, meeting, new and increasingly stringent stakeholder expectations. And when I say that, it could be everything from regulators in terms of our environmental performance through to, of course, shareholders in terms of improving productivity. At the same time, I mean, I think what we do share in common is this notion of the digital capabilities and the data that it brings to individuals is still about having an employee at the heart of the design and enabling that individual to do the best work they can on behalf of the company. And it also, I think, is beginning to sort of show us that the nature of the work that the individual does is changing. What I mean is you can drive decision making lower in the organization. Certainly during the pandemic, we saw tremendous opportunities, or we took opportunities, I suppose, or advantage of some of the capabilities we had. People couldn't travel. So when we needed expertise to be very local to an issue on our plant, or we wanted to continue with certain management system activities that are essential for our safe operation, we used, built-in cameras so that people could engage on the ground. And that worked quite well, actually, surprisingly well.
When you say built-in cameras, do you mean wearables? Is that, kind of
Yeah,
someone
wearables.
wandering around
Yeah,
with a camera, wandering
exactly,
around the factory
exactly.
floor?
Yes, I think the other point I'd make is that the way we're thinking of it, of this future factory concept is not a end point. I mean, obviously the technology is rapidly developing, the thinking is rapidly developing. In some ways, maybe our biggest challenge is to keep up with the pace of innovation. And it is triggering transformation in how we operate. But at the same time, it's a large elephant that you have to learn how to bite off and digest.
Biting off a large elephant. I mean, that is exactly how it feels to me when I listen to some of this stuff, that it just sounds vast. I'd be interested in some practical examples. Sasha, you've got a range of customers across a range of sectors. What are the things that you're seeing that are making the biggest difference? And how did the pandemic change the way your customers were actually, what they were planning to implement and how they implemented it?
Yeah. So in my eyes, the biggest difference that I have seen in all my customer conversations is actually it is a holistic approach. In the meantime, in the past, it was more or less tactical. We spoke about digitizing, right? So the technology was always in the centerpiece of the planning. But people, processes were actually, or culture were left outside. So in the pandemic, we have seen that in some degree the technology was available, but people were not used to use the technology, or were not actually able to adapt the technology in the right way. So in the meantime, I think we can really speak about digital transformation, because digital transformation means actually that it is a holistic approach. We see, as also the previous speakers already said, it is actually more employee-centric, more customer-centric. The processes are redefined. And I think that's probably the biggest difference compared to the past. Everyone tries to challenge the status quo. They are rethinking the processes also regarding supply chain, also how they are actually operating with the larger systems. What we also see is actually the centralization of data, centralization of the infrastructure parts. I think simplification is certainly something that is trending at the moment, and simplification is needed actually in order to be able to step up and to then have afterwards more sophisticated systems to advance faster. So it's about, eventually it's always about time to market, time to value. And I think these are the pre-steps that we are seeing at the moment.
Brilliant. I mean, it all also feels, and again, I'm not in manufacturing myself. I follow it from the outside, but it feels like a vast investment. I mean, first of all, how if you were giving advice about, how to know to a company, how do you know where to invest, what to invest in? How do you know what kind of a return you're going to get on this? Because it does feel it could be as long as a piece of string. Eric, I know you have views on this.
Sure. I'd say it starts at your business case, right? Anytime you're going to make any kind of investment in your business, you it's difficult sometimes when we talk about I4O to not get hung up in the technology or chase that shiny object, but it still has to have value to your business. One of the great things that's going on with the I4O change is that it's really democratizing data. It's lowering the barriers to entry. Whether that means it's easier for you to create a digital system or go find one that's even available in the cloud that you can deploy without an IT infrastructure, or if it's in physical automation where you have things like collaborative robots that have more intuitive UIs that people can learn in a day instead of learning in years of doing that. That's as that barrier to entry comes down, we'll continue to see the importance of data and the way people use data to change how they're interacting with it on a daily basis. And if you look around in your daily life, you see this now, and maybe it happens by graduation, right? So as it's little by little, you may not realize it. But think back to 20, 25 years ago. If you wanted to go somewhere, you had to get out a map, you had to think about it, you had to plan a trip, or you went online and you printed out some turn-by-turn directions. Today, if you want to get anywhere, my children have no concept of what that is. They get in the car, they tell Siri where they want to go, and off they go. And she not only tells them how to get there, she navigates them around hazards, around traffic and other things. As those systems were not imaginable 20 years ago, manufacturing is going through that same transformation right now.
Thank you. So
I
Bridget,
yeah,
go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to
Well,
say, I just want to build on what Eric said in terms of, where do you start? And I definitely believe as well that you have to start with a very clear understanding of what matters for your business, strategically, what you, where the business is heading. Not just because that makes good common sense, but because it creates a certain power and it enables and it creates a certain pull into the organization of maybe some of the capabilities that are being offered. The second thing I would say is that even as I say that is true, I think there are some fundamental things that you can do that you can almost trust will be helpful. Very basic things like, do you have the infrastructure for all these things to communicate with each other effectively at a speed that you need them to communicate. For me, in a manufacturing environment where optimization of our processes is crucial to our profitability, you need to have people who are data literate, have the skill set to know what to do with this data when it arrives on their desktop. So I would say be very guided by the business strategy, but in a sense trust that there are some fundamentals that are going to be needed no matter what your priorities are.
Thank you. I mean, you mentioned in there you need people who are data literate. Obviously, the skills and the labor force absolutely crucial. Svetan started off by saying, it's these future factories. People are at the heart of it. One thing that what puzzles me slightly is we keep talking about, we need data literate. We need to upskill all our workforce. But if we're bringing AI into the equation, isn't it the case that in fact that a lot of that burden can be taken by the AI and that allows you to push this efficiency right the way down, even through, say, lower skilled workers, that you can adapt to each workstation and also take on some of the responsibility of that through AI? And Svetan, do you have a view on this?
AI will definitely change the way we do things, but it will also enhance the human role in the manufacturing process. It will just probably take over some of the more data rich part of the decision making process and integrate it better in a kind of a harmony and link human and artificial intelligence together for better decision making. So from my perspective, AI will only enhance the role of the human operator in the manufacturing system, and it will deliver additional advantages in terms of ability to analyze large amount of data, establish different patterns in the data, and then probably allow decision making in terms of playing a variety of different possible scenarios almost instantaneously, which a human brain cannot do. But that will support rather than replace the human operator in the process.
But it is true that ultimately, sorry, go ahead, Bridget.
I just want to build on that because it might sound like, okay, my workforce today, I don't believe they have that capability to play the role that Stefan just explained. But actually, there's different, I suppose, demands or expectations or needs. So there's different sort of degrees to which you need to have an understanding of, say, data analytics. So perhaps the more routine stuff, a lot of the analysis will be delivered to you, and you need to have just to understand the fundamentals. But obviously, as the decision making is more complex and so on, then the sophistication grows. So it's not suddenly we need a whole pile of PhD mathematicians to run our processes. It simply means that everybody needs to upskill.
Right. Absolutely. And so I'd say it makes all of your people, as you get that richness of the data and the information, which is more important, and that's where the AI is really helping to convert that data into the information. What you're doing is giving people the ability to make better decisions. And so as an operator on the front line, their scope of influence is changing. Where before they were focused on maybe one machine or one very finite process, now maybe they're responsible for a group of machines or a department set of processes because they have more inputs and more information that they can react to. That's part of where the upskilling is going to come. You're going to see that operators are doing more, say, technician work, technicians are doing more engineer work, and it's just a ripple effect throughout the whole organization.
So, and by the way, sorry for interrupting again, but I just want to say, there is a human at the heart of this, like we keep saying, and for many of my employees, that's a hugely exciting and rewarding prospect. That their degree of influence and their ability to sort of have, as it were, some control over the success of what they're being asked to do is enhanced and improved.
So that leads us on to this question about, what does this mean for cost? Are you going to have to increase wages, but do you have benefits from all this? I mean, in terms of the cost benefit, Sasha, I'll come to you because again, you see a broad range of companies. Do you see a real impact in terms of wages as people implement this, in terms of costs as people implement this? What are you seeing in that balance? And then moving on to the question of, does this give us more flexibility to manufacture in high cost countries?
Yeah, so in all the conversations that I see is actually return of investment and also the time to value. So how long does it take to get value out of the product? And in the past, also the mistake was very often that companies try to do the transformation in one big step. So this actually caused a lot of dependencies. And what we also saw is that the projects and the transformation in general took quite long, because one stream was delayed, and it has delayed many different other streams. So what we see at the moment is that the companies are taking baby steps. And what I also always try to promote is actually think big, start small, grow fast. This allows actually also to implement the technology a little bit faster, but also allows what Bridget said before, to take the employees alongside the process, so they are not overwhelmed with the changes that we see. So in my eyes, when it comes again to the investment that the companies have to make, start rather small, try to experiment with different technologies instead of doing a large pre-investment and then be dependent on one single project. And then eventually this also allows to balance a little bit more the wages of the employees, and also the manufacturing or producing actually elements is not dependent on the location anymore, because as we also discussed already, when we have automation, to some degree the work can be done also then remotely, even though for blue collars. So this gives almost every company a little bit more flexibility when it comes actually to producing or looking at the supply chain. It gives much more flexibility from the entire process.
Brilliant. And that is one of the themes that's come out in the last few days of this event, this series, is that with all the volatility that we have around the world, supply chain disruption, geopolitical tensions, a lot of manufacturers are saying, globalization isn't as great as it was cracked up to be. We need to source and produce near to where our customers are. The idea of regionalization to be more resilient. So I mean, Eric, I'd like to come to you on this, but is this the future factory allowing you to manufacture in high wage countries? Is it actually high cost countries? Is it actually changing the way you're thinking about your footprint?
Absolutely. So one of the things I think you're going to see as we move forward in the future factory is a shift from, say, a labor centric view of manufacturing to a more holistic view, where I don't want to say operations centric, but you're going to have to balance capital investment and your investment in labor. And as you mentioned, right, the labor is going to become more skilled. They're going to be capable of doing more things, and you're going to balance that with investments to achieve higher levels of efficiency, faster lead times, and turnaround time. That time to value concept that Sasha was talking about is going to become critical, not just in, hey, it takes me, let's say, 26 weeks to have a lead time from a product to the shelves. If I can cut that lead time in half, there's huge value in that, in our ability to respond to the market demand, and really the shift in how we're all perceiving commodities and things today. If you think about, if today you decided you wanted to go buy something, you can buy almost anything you want, and in a matter of days have it at your front door, right? Through various means. This has completely shifted people's perception of their willingness to wait for products. And so not having that ability to respond immediately to those shifts in customer demand will be detrimental for companies that can't keep up with their operations to be able to satisfy that demand going forward. And all of that is driving more investment in the process of how we're doing things to compress those lead times and everything else, which is the vertical integration of the supply chain. And it's absolutely breaking down that barrier to allow us to make where we sell regionally. Because one of the simplest things to lean out in my supply chain is the lead time within my supply chain.
Fantastic. And also, I think you have actually got a program, and I definitely want the listeners to hear this, because I think it's quite striking, where you are in the process of bringing down a lot of your cost in the United States to the same level as Mexico, which is often cited as, the back garden factory of America. How has that happened?
So it's really through that focus. on it starts at the design level, right? How do I design a product for manufacturability? How do I make good decisions up front in the design process so that I can make that product more automatable and I can drive down a lot of the costs just through that. Then it's about building and making the investments in, say, the automation piece. And one of the things that's different about automation today than how we think about automation in the past, it was often when you automated in the past, people would think about them automating a product. I'm going to build this thing with my automation. The problem is the innovation cycle really makes that a losing battle going forward. Because if I'm innovating, say every 18 months, I can't retrofit or throw away my automation every 18 months. It's just not going to be cost effective. But if instead I automate at a process level and say, when I'm building this product, I know that I'm going to be doing some level of soldering, gluing, screw driving, applying labels, and I build process-centric automation, I can then take those pieces of automation, and as my innovation cycle happens, the processes I do, I've been doing them for 20 years. They've changed a little, but by and large, they're the same. What it's really becoming is, how do I break this line apart so that I can reconfigure it almost like Lego bricks to modify for my product? And that also makes scalability come into play. So if today I have an automation line building a product and it has a certain level of I do it at a certain tact time because I'm building so many units a year. If that just becomes the next big thing, well, I can simply build another production line. Or do I simply add more Lego bricks into my existing line to bring my cycle time down? So instead of making this huge investment to spin up more capacity, I make a smaller investment to just make my existing capacity faster by breaking that process down. We've been doing this for years in labor. The difference is applying that same concept into automation.
Fascinating.
That's a
And
very
Bridget,
good
is that?
point.
Oh, sorry, Sasha, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I had some automation conversations with 5 or 6 of our large customers, and everyone told me actually budget is decreasing from the operational perspective. They have less resources available. They have also less time available to produce. But on the other hand, the company or organization is expecting higher outcomes, more productivity, and also more quality. And this is clearly a conflict that we see, right? Budget less, higher outcomes. And this is where really automation can help to scale out and to actually improve learning capabilities, to increase the scope, and so on and so forth.
That's fascinating. And oh yes, go ahead, Svetan.
Just to add to that, facilities are effectively becoming more ubiquitous, where the same manufacturing system can seamlessly almost adapt, configure, reprogram itself to deliver different products. And that is very visible, particularly in the smaller volume customized products, where that becomes a requirement basically for survival of the businesses in that area. Also, we're moving more towards, rather than having large production lines, they're becoming smaller but multifunctional environment, which can continuously transform itself and emulate different parts of the process as required. That allows repurposing, moving from one product to another in a much more seamless way. And also by leveraging smart technologies, we achieve high level of utilization of the resources, which makes it much more cost effective to manufacture, particularly in customized kind of product range.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, but let me just say to the audience one more time, please do contribute your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom right of your screen, because this is your opportunity to ask our experts anything that you want about this process of the future factory. One aspect that we haven't really talked about, but is clearly front of mind for anybody who's manufacturing today, is obviously climate change, net zero. We talked a lot about the data, but you know, it isn't just about the emissions that you produce. I presume the future factory doesn't stop at the factory gate. It actually applies to when the product is bought and how it's used, and then back into the design. We've talked a bit about that process. And so, scope 3 emissions are going to be required, reductions in scope 3 emissions are going to be required from manufacturers as well. How does the future factory feed into the climate change issue? And where are you, Bridget, where are you seeing it's that thinking of future factory makes a difference to how you think about your products, how they're used, and how it helps you to meet your emissions targets?
I think I could speak for the next 18 minutes on that topic. But first of all, we are a large CO2 emitter. We're in the business of producing plastics, which clearly have, large environmental impact that we're addressing as well. And I would say there's the first and obvious way is in terms of further optimization of our processes so that we reduce the amount of CO2 we produce per kilogram of product that we make. And the reason why some of this new digital capability is so helpful is that in some ways it feels sometimes like we've reached the limit of how much we can optimize with our current tools and just the extent to which individuals can cope with the data that they have. So the additional capabilities that these new digital tools gives us allows us to sort of almost go to the next frontier of optimization, which is very relevant in complex systems. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing is that, particularly scope 3 emissions, of course, are connected to some extent to your supply chains. And if you can, if you have the ability to further optimize those supply chains, then you can definitely have an impact on your scope 3 emissions. But for us, most of the benefit will come from scope 1 and scope 2. So either from how we produce or the energy that we use in producing the products that we make.
Thank you for that. Eric, are you seeing a real difference in your own carbon footprint or that of your supply chain as a result of this?
Yes, so we have a sustainability target from a 2030 perspective to actually become carbon positive, right? And one of the ways that we're looking at doing that, along with say some zero landfill opportunities, is we're really focused on sustainable packaging. So not just changing the way we operate, but as a goods to consumer company, right? How are we changing the way that you get the product so that we're not generating more landfill, and how are we bringing down our carbon emissions in just the choices that we're making and how to package our product. And what we're finding, people used to believe that in order to do that, sustainability is going to cost more. It actually doesn't. When done right, we've actually been able to reduce the costs of our packaging while improving the sustainability. And so it's really nice when you can do both a positive business as well as positive for the environment.
Okay. But coming back to the theme of the future factory, I mean, does that help in how you manufacture and produce that at lower emissions? Is it obvious that it's just the real-time data and how you assemble that? Does it highlight where the problems are coming?
At a factory level, it's probably more probably more around the supply chain side as where the
Right.
carbon piece is going to come. But for us, that's of course a significant portion. But because we generate so much, I mean, think about any product that you buy in today's world, right? The amount of packaging that's involved to keep that product safe on its way to you is a lot of it is exactly that. And how much of that has to do with just the lead time that's involved, its shelf life, and what its journey is going to look like on its way to you. So even as simple as being able to put, say, reciprocating saw blades into a paper-backed carrier instead of a blister pack has a huge impact on the environment. And when we look at, so from a data perspective, we can look at data around, say, the sales and so on to target and make those improvements. But
Yeah, I'm going to say on packaging. That's fine. I mean, I suppose both of you have talked a lot about the supply chain. So Svetan, I suppose when we talk about the future factory, what you're doing in the factory, I presume, can only work if your supply chain keeps up with you technologically. So how important, how do you deal with a supply chain that, often involves smaller companies, maybe not the financial resources? Is it a problem of, your future factory can't really work if every link in that supply chain is plugged in the same way that you are? And how do you as a manufacturer help that to happen?
the supply chain is critical for the future factory to function. And there are several challenges to this. One is probably moving from more global to more local supply chain, which has environmental, social, and other impacts, which will come with that. The second dimension is to get the whole supply chain to the same standard. And then the question is how we can lower the barriers of implementation of some of the digital technologies down in the supply chain. And there are very interesting developments in this area where low cost technology can be applied with significant impact, which builds the confidence of the supply chain of particularly SMEs, and also allow them to see the benefits quite rapidly. And if that is achieved, then a common system that integrates the supply chain in a much more integrated way will make a huge difference and also will lead to more local, more greener production as a result of that.
Brilliant. Thank
Just
you.
to add one comment to that.
Yeah, go
So
on.
what we see is actually, and I can just second what Svetlana just said. The supply chain is also changing when I speak with the IT people, right? So they have more and more organizations they are working with. They are not only large companies; they are working more with startups to increase the agility. But at that point, onboarding and offboarding is also very important. And again, I'm coming back to my topic, time to value or lead time. So it is crucial for the companies to onboard all the different other organizations into their supply chain. And in the meantime, also, I think this topic has also heavily increased since the pandemic. Security is a quite important topic when it comes to protecting supply chain, protecting the own intellectual property. So this means both needs to be in balance. You need to fast onboard your supply chain or the entire value chain, but on the other hand, you need to keep the exposure very low to the other organizations in order to not increase the attack surface. So security is certainly something which is across all the industries, but also in manufacturing, especially because of the supply chain stream, quite important in the meantime.
But part of the problem, obviously, when we're talking about the supply chain, is not every place that you source has necessarily the infrastructure to support that digital technology and to support that kind of. I mean, how do you get around that if your suppliers or indeed you have factories operating in areas where you know, that infrastructure doesn't exist or isn't as efficient? What can you do to build as much of a future factory as you can in that sort of a context? Svetan, I saw you nodding. Is there?
I mean, I can give an example. We have a joint project with the University of Cambridge called Digital Manufacturing on a Shoestring, where we really leverage very low cost technology like Raspberry Pis, which cost £25, to really implement low cost solutions into SMEs. And that has been transformational in terms of the acceptance of the technology, the spread of the technology, and the confidence, particularly in SMEs, that investment in the technology is critical and beneficial to them. Now, if we go into the larger kind of challenge of digital infrastructure in different geographical locations, then there could be solutions along these lines which can allow almost very reconfigurable, very customizable, low-cost solutions that can overcome any infrastructure challenges that you can experience in different geographical locations.
Brilliant, thank you. I mean, Eric, I think you operate in lots of obviously different regions. Is that a challenge that you guys have faced, and how have you overcome it? I love the idea of Raspberry Pi.
So the yes, we connectivity levels of investment, things are different around the globe, right? And it just it's always been that way. So it's about pairing the solutions that are right for what you're doing. If you talked before about labor costs and those differentials between the high cost countries and others. And so the solution that you're going to deploy in a high cost country is going to be different than the solution you're going to deploy, elsewhere, because you want to balance that out. And Raspberry Pi or other low cost systems are several things you can do. The process is what's most important. And so you have to make sure that whatever you're solving for, you're actually improving. If today you have a data collection system where people go by and they record information and they enter it into a database, and you say, hey, I want to sensorize and transform all of this so that all of this happens autonomously. Well, did you really solve the problem you were trying to solve? Was your goal to free those people up to go do something else, and that has a certain value associated to it? Then great, go do that. But if your goal was simply to digitize the data, you were already digitizing the data, just in a lower cost manner. So it's about keeping your eye on what the value is going to bring for your business. And Sasha said something earlier about the failing fast and starting small and so on. And I'll say that applies to anything that you're doing, whether it's the data collection or anything else. Take a page out of the Agile playbook. Really start to think iteratively, whether you want to call that plan, do, check, act, or whatnot. But how do I do a quick proof of concept of whatever I'm trying to do? Solve manually first and say, yes, this is really what I want. And then you can go make those investments in the digital collection or the data side.
Brilliant, thank
And
you.
quite honestly, I think that's true for any environment you're in. It's not just limited to, maybe low cost, or not low cost, but locations where all the data capability isn't available. I think that's a very good principle, no matter where you are.
Brilliant. So this is absolutely fascinating. We've got a couple of questions in, and we've sort of got about 7 minutes left. So I'll take some of the questions here. The first one, and I think this is for you, Bridget, because you've talked about how you've talked that you have used wearables in your factories. The first question is, how are you actually using, just concrete examples of what you're using virtual or augmented reality for inside your factories?
Certainly using cameras on helmets, literally, so that remote experts can get very close to the issue. Or if they want to, observe a certain activity, then they can do that, and they can interact and provide advice. So that's a very straightforward example. We use robots a lot to eliminate the need for individuals to be placed in potentially unsafe situations, and specifically in what we call confined spaces. So, it's quite a typical practice that you need to go into inside large pieces of equipment to inspect them. We now put robots in there, and the expert stays outside and in a safe location and can do everything that they need to do. The other thing we're experimenting actually with a partner on site is changing how we train people. So there are a number of fairly standard safety systems that we need everybody to be very familiar with. So we're using sort of 3D automatic or automated or augmented reality to actually help them have a different experience of the training and improve the quality and the competency of the individual. Those are just some examples.
Yeah, simulated training. It reminds a bit like pilots, really, isn't it? They've been doing it for years.
Yeah.
Eric, are you using augmented reality or virtual reality in your factories at all?
The closest we've come is that remote expert use case. Typically, the pandemic, especially when everything went to Zoom and to teleconference and so on, that's been very valuable. We've done some limited experiments around training in a virtual environment, like this is how you operate a cell, and based on the digital twin and so on. But mostly we've limited it so far to that remote expert use case. But I think Svetlana had something to add too.
Yeah, go ahead, Svetlana.
Yeah, I mean, we have done several implementations of augmented reality in manual assembly, where the augmented reality is used to guide the operator through complex assembly process, particularly in the aerospace industry. And that seems to be taking off now as a mainstream technology, which manufacturers are starting to become comfortable with.
Yeah, I've seen some of that. It is quite amazing that, you can go in, you're wearing the goggles and whatever, and you can see what you have to fix, and it is pretty impressive. We've got another question here, and I think this one would be, I think, for Sasha, because you mentioned it briefly about the security, and our audience wants to know, how are digitized factories being protected from cyber risks and threats? And I know it's a huge concern, especially some of the geopolitical tensions and cyber warfare is expressed through industrial espionage, you know, dipping into secrets and stealing patents, etc. So how is this digitalized world going to be protected?
So right now, a so-called zero trust approach is actually trending not only at the vendor side but also at the company side. Zero trust means never trust, always verify, just-in-time access, and just enough access. So this means really trying to limit the access from the different users, entities, and so on and so forth to a minimum in order to decrease the attack surface. But this is just only the first step. As the attacks are going to be more and more sophisticated, we also need to rely on artificial intelligence, data analytics, so to understand the patterns of an attack. And the last point, the third point, is assume breach. So I think to some certain degree, we need to assume that the breach already happened. And at that point, we need to also be able to react faster, because this is quite often a problem. An attack already happened maybe 1 or 2 or maybe even longer, 6 months ago, but the companies are not aware of that, right? So also the time to the reaction has to be decreased here.
And it's absolutely right. This idea, I'm struck sometimes the number of times we hear there's been a leak, but it's many, many months later. Just in general, in terms of personal data. I mean, Bridget, you've talked about how you're really very much experimenting with all of this. What sort of security do you rely on to ensure that you are not going to be a victim of cyber attacks?
Obviously, without sharing too much, I can tell you that it's a risk that we are very aware of and that we actively manage. And we have all sorts of capabilities along the line. What Sasha mentioned in terms of constant monitoring, various obviously security layers, limiting access to the absolute minimum, and having, of course, game plans on how we deal with something if it were to occur. So it's something that we've been actively managing for some years. But of course, as everybody knows, the threat has increased dramatically in the last few years. So, yeah.
So we have about 1 minute left, and what I'm going to ask each of you to do in sort of 15 seconds is to, if you had one piece of advice for the implementation of the future factory to the audience, what is the one thing you recommend that they would do, or technology they explore, or process they introduce? Eric, what would your one piece of advice be?
Find what's going to be valuable to your business, understand the first step that you need to take, and just start. You don't have to have a long-term plan or the complete thing worked out. You just need to get started and start to make progress. It's within your reach.
Don't try and do it all. Excellent. Sasha?
Invest in automation. So I think this will turn the operational processes upside down. And I agree to Eric. So don't overthink. Just as I said before, start small and you can grow fast. That's it.
Svetan?
I think from my perspective, it's invest in skills and really understand the business case of every technology that you're trying to implement.
Brilliant, thank you. And Bridget, what would you suggest?
Depending on where you're starting, I would say invest in some resources, people resources that can form part of your core team that can help do what the other panelists described in terms of identifying the opportunities that make most sense to your business, where you are right now, and what you see coming towards you in terms of challenges over the next couple of years. So I would say invest, possibly in a very small way, in people, but invest in people.
That's probably my favorite way of ending a panel like this. You know, the future factory is not a dark factory. It's a human-centric factory, maybe fewer humans, but still a human-centric factory. And also just get going. Don't sit around. Don't be intimidated by it. Just get started. Start small and then go fast. So I want to thank our speakers for a really rewarding conversation. Thank you so much. It's been really interesting. And I'd like to remind the audience that the session is available on demand for the next 90 days on our event website. So please do share it. And thank you, the audience, for your great questions. Thanks, everybody, and on to our next panel. Thank you. Bye.